Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Yabhutale Srimad Bhakti Vedanta Swamin Itinamine Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimad Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nivishesha Shunyavadi Paschatyarisha Darine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nivishesha Shunyavadi Paschatyarishatarine Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasari Gaura Bhaktarinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Hari Bol Gaura Hari Bol Hari Bol Gaura Hari Bol Hari Bol Jai Hari Bol Hari Bol Gaura Hari Bol Jai Prabhupada Jai Prabhupada Jai Prabhupada Jai Prabhupada Jai Gurudev Jaya Gurudev Jai Gurudev Ananda Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai Gaura Premanandi Hare Krishna. Welcome everyone, welcome Amit, welcome Prakash, Poonam, welcome Rajesh, Rishika and Varshana Kishori Mataji. Hare Krishna, our session for our Bhagavad Gita Diploma course, Hare Krishna, is the second session. Today I'll quickly introduce to you Rishika. She is a daughter of a rishi, That's a good start. So Rushika has just recently contacted me. She moved from London here to Leicester, and she looked for association, and she promised she would come, and there she is. Thank you very much, Rushika. It is absolutely beautiful. It is wonderful to have you with us. Hare Krishna. And we'll quickly introduce Amit. Amit has been a long time attendee and member of the Hare Krishna Center here in Leicester. He is involved with animal rights and the vegan society. Prakash is from Delhi. It is very late, but he always makes it, at least for some time. New Delhi, welcome Prakash. Poonam and Rajesh have recently joined us. There are doctors. Doctor and Poonam, what was that? Was that a pharmacist or dentist? I think it was a dentist.
Yes, you're right, dentist.
Yes, right. Both from London. And Vaishana Kishori, very long-standing member of the Hare Krishna Center, and Puchari and head cook and all of that. Welcome, everyone. Right. So let's a little bit recap what we have done last week. Very, very brief. In the first session, by the way, no, I'll mention that later. First session. So we did a little bit of stock taking. We tried to find out where is everybody at. How much have you were you involved in Bhagavad Gita? Have you been reading Bhagavad Gita from cover to cover or some chapters? What is your favorite chapter? And so on. So that was a little bit of stock taking. Where are we with our engagement with the Gita? Then we looked at the historical context of the Gita within the Mahabharata. Then we spoke about the first 6 chapters, the middle 6 chapters, the last 6 chapter. Bhagavad Gita has 18 chapters, 6, 6, and 6. It's like a cover of a book. We explained the first 6 chapters as a front cover, the last 6 chapters as a back cover, and in the middle is the most valuable content, Bhakti Yoga. Then we spoke that the Gita has been understood since hundreds of years, in the Western countries also, as an armchair philosophy. So, of course, Gita is not anymore an armchair philosophy since Srila Prabhupada came and brought with him the Bhagavad Gita as it is. Then we spoke the Gita needs to be lived. Not an armchair philosophy. We need to live the Gita. We need to put the teachings of the Gita into our daily lives. Then we spoke about the Guru Parampara, the disciplic succession, the chain, going back to 5,000 years ago, where Lord Krishna spoke the Bhagavad Gita for the second time to his disciple Arjuna. And we spoke about how the Bhagavad Gita came from the sun god Vivasvan to Manu to Ikshvaku. And there are specific verses in the Gita also. The Gita was meant for kshatriyas, for warriors, and then it came into human society. Then we spoke about the Gita had been apparently lost, and what was lost, and we spoke about the meaning, the interpretation that had been lost of the Bhagavad Gita. Right, okay, that was what we did last week. We have only limited time till 8 o'clock, so we'll need to really use every minute. You have all received, I believe so, the Gitamrita audio introduction. Have you? Please raise your hands if you have listened to it, or who has listened to it. Amit, introduction. Yes, here, Amit, Vashana Mataji. So that is very important. You listen to that introduction, setting the scene a little bit. So that gives a brief idea of the Bhagavad Gita before we really start. So we will look at some reviews of the Bhagavad Gita. One moment. Some reviews by scholarly persons. Gita reviews. There are many. I will just pick a few. That is from Dr. Geddes McGregor, Emeritus Distinguished Professor of Philosophy, University of Southern California. So this Bhagavad Gita, which Srila Prabhupada has presented, it is used around the world in universities as a teaching resource, and it is very much appreciated. So here is what Dr. Geddes McGregor has to say. No work in all Indian literature is more quoted, because none is better loved in the West than the Bhagavad Gita. Translation of such a work demands not only knowledge of Sanskrit, but an inward sympathy with a theme and a verbal artistry. For the poem is a symphony in which God is seen in all things. Gita means song, of course. Bhagavad Gita, that is a song of God. So Swami does a real service for students by investing the beloved Indian epic with fresh meaning. Whatever our outlook may be, we should all be grateful for the labor that has led to this illuminating work. So, a nice review from Dr. McGregor. So maybe we'll look at another one. A short one from Thomas Merton, a theologian. The Gita can be seen as a main literary support for the great religious civilization of India, the oldest surviving culture in the world. The present translation and commentary is another manifestation of the permanent living importance of the Gita. So he captured here something. The Gita is not a dead philosophical book, it is a living book. And here is a professor of Sanskrit, Dr. Samuel D. Atkins from Princeton University. I'm most impressed with A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada's scholarly and authoritative edition of Bhagavad Gita. It is a most valuable work for the scholar as well as the layman, and it is of great utility as a reference book as well as a textbook. I promptly recommend this edition to my students. It is a beautifully done book. So that may suffice. 3 reviews of the Bhagavad Gita. There are many more, but time doesn't allow to go any further. So again, it has been appreciated by the scholarly community, by Sanskrit professors, by professors of religion, by theologians, by Sanskrit knowers, and so on. So last week, we spoke about the origin of the Gita. The origin. Before Krishna spoke the Bhagavad Gita to Arjuna 5,000 years ago on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. So, Nalini Mataji, she spoke about Vivasvan, the sun god, the present sun god, he spoke it to Manu, and from Manu it went to Ikshvaku. So let's have a little bit a closer look on what we have heard. Vivasvan Manu Ikshvaku. There is a verse in Bhagavad Gita 4, chapter text 1. The personality of Godhead, Lord Sri Krishna said, I instructed these imperishable signs of yoga to the sun god Vivasvan. Vivasvan instructed it to Manu, the father of mankind, and Manu in turn instructed it to Ikshvaku. And by the way, if we're looking at the etymological meaning, Manu, mankind, that word man comes actually from Manu, the Sanskrit, original Sanskrit. So, there is in the Mahabharata, in Shanti Parva, we can trace the history of the Gita as follows. In the beginning of the millennium known as Treta Yuga, this science of the relationship with the Supreme was delivered by Vivasvan to Manu. Treta Yuga, there are 4 cycles in the cosmic creation. Like there are 4 seasons, spring, summer, autumn, which we are now and entering winter. And then again it comes spring, summer, autumn, winter. So in the cosmic creation, there is also Satya Yuga, that is a spring, so to speak, of the creation. Satya, then comes Treta Yuga, Dvapara, where Lord Krishna appeared at the end, and Kali Yuga, after which Kalki Avatar will come and a new Satya Yuga will begin. So, Manu, being the father of mankind, gave it to his son Ikshvaku, the king of this earth planet, forefather of the Raghu dynasty in which Lord Ramachandra appeared. Therefore, Bhagavad Gita existed in human society from the time of Maharaj Ikshvaku. So why I'm reading that, just to give us an idea of the historicity of the Bhagavad Gita. Of course, we know 5,000 years ago, Lord Krishna spoke to Arjuna, not that long ago, but when the first time it was spoken by Vivasvan, we have different numbers. Here are some numbers. At the present moment, we have just passed through 5,000 years of the Kali Yuga, which lasts 432,000 years. Before this, there was Dvapara Yuga, 800,000 years. And before that, there was Treta Yuga, 1,200,000 years. Thus, some 2,005,000 years ago, Manu spoke the Bhagavad Gita to his disciple and son, Maharaj Ikshvaku, the king of the planet Earth. The age of the current Manu is calculated to last some 305,300,000 years, of which 120,400,000 have passed. Accepting that before the birth of Manu, the Gita was spoken by the Lord, Sri Krishna, to his disciples, the sun god Vivasvan, a rough estimate is that the Gita was spoken at least 120,400,000 years ago. So this is perhaps a number you want to remember. Also, if anybody asks you how old is the Gita, at least 120,400,000 years. And in human society, it has been extant for 2 million years. It was respoken by the Lord again to Arjuna about 5,000 years ago. That is a rough estimate of the history of the Gita according to the Gita itself, according to the version of the speaker, Lord Sri Krishna. It was spoken to the sun god Vivasvan because he is also a Kshatriya. Kshatriya means a fighter, a king, administrative. And is the father of all Kshatriyas, who are descendants of the sun god or the Surya Vamsa Kshatriyas. Because Bhagavad Gita is as good as the Vedas, being spoken by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This knowledge is apaurushaya, superhuman. Since the Vedic instructions are accepted as they are, without human interpretation, the Gita must therefore be accepted without mundane interpretation. The mundane wranglers may speculate on the Gita in their own ways, but that is not Bhagavad Gita as it is. Therefore, Bhagavad Gita has to be accepted as it is from the disciplic succession, and it is described herein that the Lord spoke to the sun god. The sun god spoke to his son Manu, and Manu spoke to his son Ikshvaku. So that is giving us a little bit of an idea about, which we touched last time, the historicity of the Gita. So now we're looking at the outline, structure and content of the Gita. Moment. Okay. Are we? Everybody is all right? Everybody is comfortable? If you have any question, be pausing from time to time. I cannot see the screen all the time, but I will come back to the screen, and if someone has his hands up, just keep it up. But we'll stop somewhere and see if there are any questions. Okay, Amit, nice to see some reaction. So, an outline of the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita begins with an inquiry. What's that inquiry? Dhritarashtra said, O Sanjaya, after my sons and the sons of Pandu assembled in the place of pilgrimage at Kurukshetra, desiring to fight, what did they do? That is the first verse of Bhagavad Gita, Dharma Kshetra, Kurukshetra, and so on. So what did they do? So it starts with an inquiry. With the two armies preparing for battle, Dhritarashtra, the father, the king, the blind king, father of Duryodhana and husband of Gandhari. Most of you know from Mahabharata the rough outline of what happened. So the armies preparing for battle, Dhritarashtra, the father of the Kurus, was doubtful about the possibility of his son's victory over the Pandavas, the sons of Pandu. He therefore asked his secretary, Sanjaya, about the situation on the battlefield. Even whilst in the palace, Sanjaya was able to mystically perceive the entire scene and explained everything to the blind king as it happened. Oh, that is very interesting. Transcendental television. So Sanjaya could, by this transcendental television, we call it, he could exactly see within his heart what is, with a mystic vision, what is happening on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, although he was in the palace of the king, away from the battlefield. Thus, he, Sanjaya, narrated how Arjuna requested Krishna to steer the chariot between the ranks of the two armies. So that he might observe who was present there. Upon seeing so many relatives, friends, teachers in the midst of both parties, Arjuna was overwhelmed with grief and decided to withdraw from the contest. He explains that after killing his own kinsman, it would be impossible for him to enjoy the earthly kingdom. This decision was based on the bodily concept of life. We'll speak a little bit later what does it mean, the bodily concept of life, in which he considered his body his very self, and that bodily relations were his brothers, cousins, grandfathers, etc. In this situation, and to rectify such a mistaken worldview, Lord Krishna spoke the Bhagavad Gita. In his opening instruction in chapter 2, verse 12, when said verse 12, Nache, very famous verse actually, Natvivaham chatunasam natvam nemi chanadipaha, and so on. Krishna describes the nature of the self as an eternal conscious being, completely distinct from the temporary material body. He expounds the science of this eternal self in the following chapters, and Krishna's words constitute the subject matter of the Gita. Such instructions are summarized in the 18th and final chapter, wherein the Lord gives his final opinion. So that is a very important point. The 18th chapter is as much as the first chapter is setting the scene, and the first chapter in fact is called setting the scene. So as much as setting the scene in the first chapter, the 18th chapter is a summary of all the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita. In the 66th verse, Krishna states that the constitutional position and duty of everyone as an eternal spiritual being is to serve him, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and as to act as he desires, Krishna. Also, Arjuna initially chose to retire from battle. After hearing Krishna's instructions, his illusion was dispelled, and he resolved to fight. Of course, the 66th verse, we know that very well, Sarvadhamam Parityaja, abandon all varieties of religion and just surrender unto me. Dhritarashtra had been hopeful of his son's victory. He had been pleased to hear that Arjuna was unwilling to fight. But after hearing and repeating the sacred dialogue, Sanjaya again disappointed him. In the closing words of the Gita, he tells the king, "You are thinking of victory, but my opinion is that where Krishna and Arjuna are present, there will be all good fortune." He directly confirmed that Dhritarashtra could not expect victory. Victory was certain for the side of Krishna because Krishna was there. For the side of Arjuna because Krishna was there. So, okay. Any questions so far before we look at the structure of the Gita? Anyone? Now it's a time to question. If not, let's move on. The structure. The Gita may be divided into 3 parts of 6 chapters as follows, as we have mentioned. Chapter 1 till 6 describes the living entity as a non-material, eternal spirit soul capable of elevating himself to self-realization by different types of yoga, the highest form of which is Krishna consciousness or Bhakti yoga. As confirmed by the final verse of the 6th chapter. Now this, sometimes people think the Bhagavad Gita is all about karma yoga, or jnana yoga, or yoga, this yoga or that. But say, missing out to the concluding shloka of this chapter, the final verse of the 6th chapter, where Krishna summarizes, and he says, Yoginam api sarvesham. Of all the yogis, the one with great faith, who always abides in me, thinks of me within himself, and renders transcendental loving service to me. He is the most intimately united with me in yoga, and is the highest of all. So that is the culmination of this 6th chapter, which this yoga is, of course, Bhakti yoga. Chapter 4 specifically deals with the transcendental position of Krishna as a supreme personality of Godhead, and with the importance of guru and disciple succession. Once Krishna's instructions actually begin in the 2nd chapter, chapter 1 serves as a prelude to the rest of the text. Chapter 2 is a synopsis of the whole subject matter of the Gita. Now, in the middle 6 chapters, the Supreme Personality of Godhead and his different energies and opulences are described. This section especially deals with the relationship between the Supreme Soul and the individual soul in regards to devotional service. Krishna also discusses the nature and activities of such pure devotional service, which he confirms to be the best process of self-realization. In the 3rd 6 chapters, the last 6 chapters, how the living entity comes into contact with material nature, how he is entangled. And we know all how we are entangled in this material nature and world. And with all the urges and anger and lust and grief and all this. Welcome, Amar.
Hare Krishna.
So, these last 6 chapters is explaining how the living entity is delivered by the Supreme Lord through different methods of fruitive activities, karma, cultivation of knowledge, jnana, and devotional service, bhakti. The Gita is actually finished in 17 chapters. Chapter 18 is considered a summary of all previous instructions. Okay, that was a little bit of the structure of the Gita. And what about the content? What is in the Gita? What's the content? There are five basic truths explained in the Gita, which are Ishvara, the Supreme Controller, Krishna, the Supreme Brahman. Jiva, the living entity, also called Atma or Jivatma. And these terms will come up again and again. Prakriti is the 3rd topic of the Gita. Material nature. Kala, time, the duration of existence of the complete manifestation of material nature. And karma, activity, more specifically material activity. So this have been a bit of the structure of the Gita and the content of the Gita. Now let's have a look at the overview and breakdown of the chapters. In chapter 1, Dhritarashtra questions Sanjay, his secretary, about the events that took place at Kurukshetra.
Prabhu, sorry to
text.
interrupt. Are you?
Yes, please.
I raised my hand. Sorry to interrupt.
yeah.
Are you looking at any notes, or is
Yes,
there
I
some
do.
notes? Is that
There
notes
are some
shared with
notes.
everybody, or are you just reading? Because
I can make notes available to you if you like. Would you
okay,
like
no
that?
problem. Yeah, yeah. No, I was just wondering because I missed last week. I thought there were some notes because I wasn't sure whether everybody were looking at notes or whether
No,
you were
no,
looking.
nobody looks at notes at this moment in time. But
Okay,
I
okay,
will
that's
make
fine.
some notes available if that would be helpful. Would that be helpful, Amit?
All the information you're giving, I was just wondering whether that can be shared, so that we can look at it at the same time.
Okay, let's try. A good idea, thank you. Let's try a screen share. Are you seeing my screen?
Yes, that is good. Yeah.
One moment. Okay, what are you seeing? Are you seeing? It says
Module 1,
module.
Chapter 1.
Okay, that's a screen share. Okay. That is helpful, right? We can follow along. We see it
Yes.
because most people are visually inclined, and seeing things will make it much more clearer than just the hearing. Okay. So we just said Dhritarashtra questions Sanjaya about what the events, what took place on the battlefield. So in the first 13th chapter, 1 to 13, it is an introduction, preparation for war. Sanjaya describes how Duryodhana, using diplomacy, solves the problem. There was actually a problem. He wanted to encourage Drona, but he also needed to make sure he's not insulting Bhishma and others. Then we hear said Bhishma is rallying his soldiers with the sound of his conch shell. And there is a symbolism there with the conch shells. It indicates their defeat. And when we look a little bit more deeper, why? What is, when Krishna blows his conch shell, there is one reaction, and the other conch shell of the Kauravas is a different story. So, now we're looking at signs of victory. This is explained in verse 14 to 20. Sanjaya describes various signs of victory for the Pandava army. The transcendental sound of conch shells of Krishna and Arjuna. And the Bhagavad Gita text actually mentions which shattered the hearts of the sons of Dhritarashtra. So there is no mention anywhere said Bhishma's conch shell and other conch shells blown by the Kauravas were shattering the hearts of the Pandavas. No mentioned at all, because they didn't. But here, when Krishna and Arjuna blew their transcendental conch shells, then it is mentioned the hearts of the sons of Dhritarashtra were shattered. So this is a sign of victory for the Pandavas. What is another sign? Krishna as Bhaktavatsalya. In verse 21 to 27, we hear Krishna appears as a chariot driver of Arjuna. And he shows his quality of Bhaktavatsalya, not as the Supreme Lord. Arjuna orders Krishna to place his chariot between the two armies, as he wants to see who is present there. Up till that point, Arjuna did not know exactly who he has to fight with, because his battle lines have been drawn, and people switched sides as well. I was just yesterday It's very interesting. It wasn't so much, we can hardly imagine that. That is very difficult for us to, in our modern days. It wasn't so much for the Kshatriyas, for which side they fought. They just enjoyed a good fight. And they knew if they leave their body on the battlefield, then they will go to the heavenly planets. And we have to leave our bodies anyway. So if they leave their bodies as in fighting, in their duty as Kshatriyas, then they will go to the heavenly planets. Of course, all those warriors who left their material body because of the presence of Krishna on the battlefield, they all got liberated. But that is a different story. So, the Kshatriyas, there are some names that changed sides, and there was a canvassing going on of bringing some fighters to their side, or the other side was canvassing. So they switched sides. It wasn't that important for who they fought, for which side. More important it was that they fought. They were fighting, and in a Kshatriya spirit, and there were Kshatriya codes of conduct, how to fight, and if someone turns his back or runs away in fear from the battlefield, that person was not engaged, that was not killed. It's completely different than any battle moral, if there is any today, that doesn't exist anymore. So, Arjuna is asking Krishna to place a chariot between the two armies. So he wanted to see, finally. There was some indication who is going to fight on which side, but eventually it wasn't clear for everyone. So he wanted to see who is actually now, that's a final call, who is on the other side. Seeing those assembled for battle, Arjuna becomes hesitant to fight when he sees the other side. Not out of fear, but out of compassion, because he saw his relatives there. He saw his teachers there. He saw Pitamaha, Bhishma there. He saw Drona there, his teacher. He saw his relatives there. Okay, are we still all here? Yes, because I hear some sound coming, going. Rajesh is here, Poonam, yes. Okay.
Yes, Prabhuji. Yeah.
No. We're losing our place. We don't want that here. Okay, I know how to get rid of that. Give me a moment. Oh, that bar is on top now. Okay. So that should do it. Here we are back. Okay. In text 28 to 46, can you still all see the text, the
Yes.
screen share?
Yes, we can.
So Arjuna has doubts. We just heard that Arjuna, he becomes hesitant because of his relatives on the other side. So in 28 to 46, compassion. You just mentioned Arjuna. Being a devotee of the Lord is a very compassionate person. Of course, later on, if said compassion is misplaced or rightly placed, in our material understanding, compassion for our relatives and our family and our teacher, that is very understandable and will come to some surprising understandings as we go on. So compassion, Arjuna being a soft-hearted devotee, he becomes overwhelmed, forgets himself when he sees his relatives. He has become fearful due to the material concept of life. That's one point. Then, enjoyment. He argues that he will not be able to enjoy his kingdom. It is won at the cost of the lives of his family members. So, very difficult situation. He fears sinful reactions for killing his kinsmen. Karma. Saintliness and fear of sinful reactions is explained here. Arjuna argues that killing one's family is sinful and will lead to hell. So he brings out all kinds of arguments. The higher principle is that real religion is whatever Krishna says and or wants. That's an interesting concept. We generally, we are familiar with moral concepts and ethical concepts. But when we speak about God, we speak about Krishna. He is a standard for the highest morality. So whatever Krishna says, that surpasses any of our mundane ethics and morality, which we are bound by mundane ethics and morality, no question about that. But if Krishna directs in a different way, then all our ideas of mundane morality and ethics are finished. So again, the higher principle is that real religion is whatever Krishna says or wants. Then there is another argument, destruction of family. Arjuna makes that argument. He argues that the destruction of the dynasty will lead to unchaste women. Because if the women are not protected and there are no men around and no husbands, then that is a difficult situation. It leads to unwanted children. The term is Vana Shankara. And the end of spiritual culture. So these are very, very strong arguments. If he fights in that war and so many kings are killed, and then the women are not protected, there will be unwanted children, the spiritual culture is ended. Arjuna, having decided not to fight, finally casts aside his bow and sits down on the chariot. That is very dramatic, and I will forward to you the first chapter of Bhagavad Gita as an audio file, and which is a dramatic version by our late Purnachandra Goswami, and you will get a bit of an idea of how dramatic this situation is. That Arjuna, he just, as a Kshatriya, he is everything has built up to the battle. Krishna tried to personally make peace, but it was not accepted. So finally, he looks who is fighting on the other side, and he decides not to engage in battle. So let's go a little bit further. In chapter 2, this chapter teaches self-realization by an analytical study of the material body and the spirit soul. So very analytical. This realization comes when one works without attachment to fruitive results and is situated in the fixed conception of the real self. Well, I doubt if we should go further. This is chapter 2. There are... Let me stop that screen sharing for a moment. Right. And let's have a look what else, because we're running close to 8 o'clock. So that was an overview and breakdown of the first chapter. Now I want to look a little bit at suggested reading points to cover verses 1 till 13. Or let's rather look, which is also a question and answers about chapter 1. For example, a question could be raised: why does Arjuna decide not to fight in the battle of Kurukshetra? We have covered that more or less. Arjuna analyzes the entire situation in terms of his own interest. He thus decides he is not interested in achieving military victory and winning a kingdom at the expense of the lives of his friends and relatives and the welfare of society. Right. This is a question just for chapter 1. And we have, let's look at, the chapter 1 is entitled Observing the Armies on the Battlefield of Kurukshetra. Chapter 2, Contents of the Gita summarized, and there could be much said about. Then we have in chapter 3, Karma Yoga, and then chapter 4, Transcendental Knowledge. And in chapter 5, we're looking at Karma Yoga, action in Krishna consciousness. And then chapter 6, Sankhya Yoga. And we'll not go any further on that because we're running rather late. So, but what I'll try to do, we have some quotes on chapter 1 from Srila Prabhupada, and I screen share that again. Give me a second. Screen share. Here we go. You can see that screen where it says chapter 1?
Yes, Prabhu.
Yes. So we'll just pick a few quotes. That is from a lecture in London from Srila Prabhupada. Why, and that's a very funny, very interesting point. Why is he, Dhritarashtra, asking the question, Kim akurvata? Kim akurvata sanshaya? What did they do, the Pandavas? They assembled to fight, and then he asking, what did they do? So Srila Prabhupada says he was very anxious about whether they had changed their decision. Otherwise, there was no question of asking Kim akurvata. Just like if you are given food, if I ask somebody, such and such gentleman was served with nice dishes, then what did he do? This is a foolish question. He would eat. That's all. Hare Krishna. So, another point, very interesting. Dronacharya knew that Drupada Maharaj has got his son. In the future he will kill me. And there's a whole backstory in Mahabharata. How Drupad had a daughter Draupadi and a son who would kill him. Drona. Still, when he offered to become his disciple to learn the military art, he accepted. Yes, that means Brahmanas were so liberal. When he is my disciple, never mind if he will kill me in the future. That doesn't matter. But I must teach him. Duty is duty. After all, everyone will die, so nobody should be afraid of death. This is Vedic civilization. This death is inevitable. As such, as sure as death. Who can avoid death? So being afraid of death, we should not deviate from our duties, real duty. And we'll look at point number 4 as well. Duryodhana was afraid of Bhima's fiery temperament and expertise in fighting. Before the battle, Bhima took 3 vows. And you may know these vows or you may not, but here are the 3 vows which Bhima took. He vowed to kill each of Dhritarashtra's 100 sons. He vowed to break Duryodhana's thigh, which he had uncovered before Draupadi. He vowed to tear up Dushashan's chest and drink his blood. So these were the vows of Bhima. So that is enough of that. I have here, which I will make available to you, some little homework. Of course, I hope and I think you all have the Bhagavad Gita as it is at home. If not, it can be found online. I will mail that out to you as well. So these are some simple fill-in exercise. It would be good if you at home you could just read that first chapter in the way we have discussed it. So that will help you to fill in that exercise. So Dhritarashtra's doubts. Number 1, he didn't want. You will want to fill that in. Number 2, fear of the battle. Why? Holy place called. Now that's easy. Holy place called. Pandavas were. So how many of these can you actually take on? There is quite a few in chapter 1. Can you take on A, Dhritarashtra's doubt? What about B, Duryodhana's diplomacy? Insights in relation to his disciple, and so on and so on. And signs of victory for the Pandavas. We spoke about that, about the conch shells and all of that. So these are some fill-in exercises. Shall we say, for a start, A, B, and C? And I will stop my screen share because we are out of time. Okay. I haven't been too much familiar with the screen share, but I am now, because we'll never have done that before. So, everybody is still here. Amar, Amit, Poonam, Rajesh, Rushika, and Vaishnav Mataji. So, let's little bit here, a couple of minutes from you. You think you can handle to fill in A, B, and C? I make that available. I have created a WhatsApp group, just not so many other devotees, just those devotees who are in that Bhagavad Gita workshop. we can handle A, B, and C fill-in exercise. You will need to look a little bit in chapter 1 to find the answers. Amit, yes, very good. So that's your homework for next week. And I will make available Gitamrita as an audio, dramatic audio reading of the entire first chapter. Yes, you should be able to fill it in. I'll just give a little bit and we see what capacity we have to, because it's not just filling in. You cannot fill it in if you don't take the guitar in your hand. So I think that is enough for today. Have we covered everything? More or less. More or less. Chapter by chapter summary. Yes. We'll carry on where we left off. Now, a few questions. Are we going too quick? Are we going too slow? Are we just right? Should we do something different? Let's hear from you. Does the screen sharing help? Rajesh?
Yeah, it helps to some extent. Screen sharing.
Yes.
And
Do you have any questions, Rajesh, so far?
No questions.
Was there anything new what you heard today, Rajesh, or is that all that is nothing new for you?
There were a few things like the vows of Bhima. I knew
Bhima,
about
yes.
drinking the blood and chest, but he will kill all the sons and all. So there were 3 vows. I didn't know about the 3 vows. I just thought it's one vow that he had.
Okay.
So there are things. Well, I had sort of idea about most of the things, but they were not sort of coherent. So when
Okay.
you hear them.
Okay, thank you, Rajesh. Amma, your hand is up.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. Yes. So lovely talk. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, I think we're going at a reasonable pace. So long as obviously I'm looking forward to this this home study a little bit, but so long as the home study certainly looks at the core teachings of the Bhagavad Gita,
Yes.
then yeah, I think that's very important. I did notice a couple of questions in there when you just scrolled through that were quite good. And yeah, so long as the following chapters home study questions are based around the core beliefs, then that will certainly put us all on the right tracks. That's like as far as I'm aware, that's
Yes.
what
That's what we want to distill out of that, the core beliefs, the core values, the core concepts of the Bhagavad Gita. Thank you, Amma. Hare Krishna. Anyone else has to say anything? Rushika, what about you?
Sorry, Prabhu, I have to get going now. So thank you.
Okay, yes, we stop in just a moment. Thank you for coming, Amma, and we're looking forward to seeing you next week for session 3. Rushika, what about you? Anything was new what you heard tonight? Or that has been you familiar with that so far? Okay. You enjoying that? Hare Krishna. So, okay, we'll stop here because we have to be on time. I'll send in that WhatsApp group, I sent all what we talked about, I sent it to you, makes it available, and we'll see you hopefully this Saturday for Srimad Bhagavatam, and definitely next Wednesday for Bhagavad Gita. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.